thanks, Jurgis, and Meryl and Ophelia and everyone else who's been responsible for organizing this excellent event. The talks have been really interesting and stimulating so far, and yeah, I'm looking forward to more great discussions. So yeah, I think this talk follows actually really closely on Katie's talk in a few different respects, which yeah, I hope will become clear to you as well as I go along. So yeah, as we know, as robots are becoming increasingly prevalent in various areas of everyday life, it's important not just to find ways of making them more efficient and safer, but also of making people feel comfortable and motivated interacting with them. And in this context, people talk a lot about trust, or use that particular construct quite often to gauge people's comfort level in interactions with robots. And what I'm going to be presenting is to do with a complementary concept, so the sense of commitment to interacting with a robot. And to illustrate what I mean by that, I'll start with a simple everyday example. This is borrowed from the philosopher Margaret Gilbert, who asks us to imagine a scenario where these two co-workers, Polly and Pam, are in the habit of chatting over a cigarette during their coffee break every day at the same time, 3 o'clock. They're always out there on the balcony outside their office chatting. They've never agreed explicitly to do this. They just are in the habit of doing it every day. And so the point is, even though they've never made an agreement or they don't have an explicit commitment, they might very well feel like they have a sense of commitment to doing this just because they've been doing it. And in fact, the extent to which they feel committed to this will depend on various situational factors. Like, for example, if they've done it every day for the past 5 years, they're going to feel much more committed than if they've only been doing it for the past week or two. Similarly, if one of them has to walk up 5 flights of stairs to get to that balcony and the other one, for some reason, can't make it, she's going to feel much more inclined or obliged even to send a text message to let her friend know, don't bother walking up the 5 flights of stairs because I can't make it. So the costs, effort costs, and possibly other costs invested in the joint action, along with the number of repetitions or the duration, factors like that seem to generate or enhance a sense of commitment to the interaction. So in order to try to understand.
So sorry to interrupt. Could I just ask, could you just maximize your slides to the presentation mode?
Of course. Yeah. Let's see. It should be quite.
If that's okay with you.
Yeah. No problem. I should have done that. Is it maximized now?
Yeah, that's perfect. Yeah, thanks.
Great.
Sorry.
Okay, so to try to understand why these factors make a difference in terms of the sense of commitment that one has, and what other factors might make a difference, my group and I, we've been working with a framework that starts by just identifying the minimal structure of situations in which a sense of commitment might arise. And so this is what we're working with. We've got 2 agents, A and B, and an outcome, which is an outcome desired by that first agent, A, and or which is a goal toward which that first agent is working. So that's O, the outcome. And there might be a part that A contributes, there might not be, but what there is in any case is X, a crucial contribution that the second agent, B, needs to make in order to bring about O. And so in situations with this structure, in talking about the sense of commitment, I mean the following. So B, that second agent, has a sense of being committed to performing X to the extent that B is motivated by her belief that A expects her to contribute X and may be relying on that expectation. So this presents us with a graded notion of the sense of commitment, so we can operationalize it in terms of motivation. How motivated is someone to make that contribution X? And we can probe to what extent that motivation is modulated by these kinds of situational factors that I've identified, like costs invested, number of repetitions. I'll say something about coordination in a bit. Factors which provide a cue that other agent, A, is expecting and maybe relying on agent B to make their contribution. So why would this be useful in the context of HRI? Well, for one thing, it could help to sustain people's motivation in the face of underperformance. So robots making errors, breaking down, which is going to be quite common, especially if they're learning new environments or learning to interact with new human users. Also overperformance. So there's some research suggesting that in some contexts where artificially intelligent agents are too good at something, humans just kind of zone out and let the AI take over, whereas in fact, sometimes there's an important contribution for the human to make as well, in terms of being vigilant, for example. So maintaining motivation in the face of the risk of underperformance or overperformance. And also, and now this I think dovetails directly on Katie's talk, it could help to boost humans' motivation to beneficial but boring or effortful tasks like exercise, physiotherapy, skills training. If we can implement design features in robots that elicit a sense of commitment on the part of the human to maintain their motivation. So I'll just now present a bit of research that we've done. First, looking at the costs, effort costs specifically. So with each of the studies that we've done, we've first done experiments in human-human interaction and then adapted them for HRI. So I'll tell you first about a couple of experiments that we did with human-human interaction, just briefly. So this one's based on the old mobile phone game, the snake game, which you probably remember. You navigate this little snake around on the screen using the arrows, the left, right, and the up, down arrows to collect these little apples that appear. So we developed a two-player version of this where the participant is operating the X-Y axis using the right and left arrows, and their partner is operating the Y axis using the up and down arrows. And actually, in the versions of this that I'm going to be telling you about, we just used a fake partner, so people thought they were interacting with a partner, but it was actually an algorithm. And so, yeah, crucially, in the version that we developed, this is different from the original snake game. It's really boring. So these apples appear at an ever slowing rate, and the snake moves really slowly, so it just becomes increasingly tedious. And we tell people, with each round of the experiment, with each round of the game, just stop whenever you think it's enough. And we measure how long they keep going as a measure of their commitment to the joint action. So some of this I've said already. So within design, what we manipulated was their perception of their partner's effort, or the apparent partner's effort. So to do that, before each round of the game, they're told that their partner has to do a CAPTCHA. You can see examples of CAPTCHAs at the bottom of the screen in order to unlock the next round of the game. And sometimes the CAPTCHA was relatively short and crisp, like the one on the left there. And sometimes really long and blurry. And so the idea is that when they believe that their partner has to solve a really long, blurry CAPTCHA, they'll feel more committed, and so they'll persist longer. So what they actually see is, my cursor is not right, is a little video of their partner solving the CAPTCHA. So you'd see these little stars appearing on the screen. This is, I think, a difficult CAPTCHA, so it's kind of slow and it's long. And then at the end, when he finally gets it, the CAPTCHA key appears. And then they play around with the snake game. So they do that 20 times, 10 in each condition. And yeah, sure enough, we see here in this first experiment, they persist longer in the high effort condition than the low effort condition. So then as a first control, we ran a second experiment where we told them, guess what, your partner is actually just an algorithm. There isn't really a partner. And so we wanted to see, will they still persist longer in the long CAPTCHA condition? And no, there the difference disappears. But now it becomes more interesting for us because we thought, all right, so it doesn't work if it's a disembodied virtual agent, an algorithm. But what if we tell them that your partner is a humanoid robot? So in this third experiment, we show them videos of the iCub practicing here on the left. You can see him practicing solving CAPTCHAs. They see this before the experiment. They're told this is their partner, and you're linked with him through the internet, they're told. So there he's solving a CAPTCHA, and they see him also practicing the snake game. And then, then they do the same experiment, 20 rounds, 10 in the high effort condition, 10 in the low effort condition, and we see the same effect as in the first experiment. So that's first indication that the perception of a partner's effort investment boosts the sense of commitment to persisting at a boring task, even if that partner, if you believe that that partner is a humanoid robot. We also wanted to try to extend this to other kinds of effort investment. And this also focuses follows on something that came up in the Q&A from the last talk. What we decided to look at was the adaptation of movement kinematics to make movements more intelligible. So if a robot is adapting its movements, apparently to make the movements more intelligible or predictable to a human interaction. So this builds on previous research done in developmental psychology on so-called motionese. So that term, motionese, refers to the way in which adults or caregivers tend to spontaneously adapt their movements to make them intelligible to kids. So slowing down, introducing segmentation between movements. And some research has been done implementing this kind of adaptation of movement kinematics in HRI. So we were building on this. So we had we devised this scenario where we tell them. Maybe I got to pause that one and run the one on the left. The robot teaches them a sequence of movements like yoga or physical therapy movements. Either, and you can see here on the left, him doing it slowly. So he's moving slowly, and so that's one movement. Then there's a pause, relatively long pause. Then the second movement. So he does 5 movements in all. I'll show you the version of this where he moves more quickly and doesn't pause between movements. So this is what we call a low effort teaching protocol. So the idea is that the one on the left, if you're trying to learn that sequence of movements, because you have to then repeat it back to him, the one on the left is easier because it's slower and there are longer pauses between the movements. And so the way it works is the robot shows them a sequence of movements, then the human tries to repeat it back, and then the robot demonstrates it again. And then they switch roles, and the human has to teach the robot something. Namely, the human teaches the robot to understand words written with her finger in the air. I don't have a video of this, just a picture. So the human is writing words in the air, and the robot tries to guess what word it is. And the robot then always says something like, "Oh, thanks. If you could show it to me one more time, that would be great." There are different phrases like that it uses each time. So the human then repeats it a second time. And they go back and forth like that a number of times. So we had, so everybody sees the high effort and the low effort protocol. The way it works is the robot first shows the sequence of movements at a medium tempo, and then either speeds up or slows down. When he speeds up, it's supposed to be like he's kind of losing patience and trying to rush through it. Whereas when he slows down, it's like we're trying to create the impression that he's investing effort to make the human learn it better. So we measured people's learning performance, how well they actually learn from these demonstrations, and also whether they then reciprocate when they go to a show to demonstrate a word for the robot, whether they reciprocate by also slowing down. And crucially, so what we measure is not the human's movement velocity full stop. We measure how much the human slows down their movement velocity from the first demonstration to the second. So this is to rule out the possibility that they're just mirroring the robot by slowing down. So it's actually their change from the first demonstration to the second that we measure. So this is what we found. The results are actually not great, I have to admit. What we found was, here you can see, so one group had the low effort protocol first and then the high effort protocol. And the other group had the opposite order in separate blocks. So what you can see on the left here, the first block, the red dot is the group that had the high effort protocol first. So they performed better than the group that had the low effort protocol. And then moving from the first to the second block, the people who had the low effort first and then the high effort protocol, their performance improves so that they're basically at the level of the people who had first the high effort, then the low effort. So the ones who had the high effort first, it's like they kind of learn the task, and the demonstrations aren't as good in the second block, but they've kind of learned it anyway. So they continue to perform quite well. And then the kinematic data. So here on the left, you have velocity. So this is the difference, like I said, between the first demonstration and the second that the human does of the skywriting thing. And so negative numbers mean the human is slowing down. And so you can see here in both groups, they tend to slow down in the first block. And moving on to the second block, the people who had first the high effort and then the low effort protocol with the robot, they stop slowing down. It's like they say, "Oh, okay, if you're not going to bother anymore, then neither will I." Whereas the ones who had first the low effort and then the high effort, they continue to slow down from the first demonstration to the second. And we see the same pattern with pause time here. So they're pausing between movements in the first block, and only if the robot keeps doing that in the second block do they keep doing that. Whereas if the robot stops doing that, they stop doing that. Okay. Now, maybe just briefly to tell you a bit about some research looking at one other factor, coordination. So Yeah, I should first tell you the kind of rationale behind this. The idea is that when and to the extent that joint actions are coordinated, just by doing your part, you're making salient to the other agent what you expect them to do, and you're relying on that expectation, because that's kind of what coordination means. It's to adapt your movements to what the other is doing or what you expect them to be doing. So to the extent that the joint action is coordinated, you're making your very movement, your very contribution expresses that you have an expectation and you're relying on it. And so that making salient of an expectation and the reliance on it should put pressure on the other agent to actually do what you seem to be expecting them to do. So to probe this, something in the chat. Oh yeah, good. You'll let me know when I have 5 minutes left, right? So to probe this, we first designed an experiment where we had people look at videos of two humans interacting. In this scenario, people are told, okay, this guy's cleaning up a pile of sand, and his neighbor is going to walk by and find his way blocked by the pile of sand, as you see here. And then, yeah, since he can't get by, he decides to help for a bit. And so he picks up a bucket, and he decides to help for a bit. And in the one condition, which is the one you're seeing here, they form a chain. So it's relatively coordinated. In the other condition, they're just going to work alongside each other. So it's less coordinated. And then we ask people various things like, how long do you think he'll keep going? How much of the sand do you think the neighbor will want to help to clean up? We also ask, if his phone rings, what do you think the chances are that he'll take the call? And we find, whatever of these questions we ask, we find a difference between two conditions. When they don't form a chain, people expect him to be less committed, to persist less long, and to be more easily distracted. So I won't go into the data from this, but I want to show you a version or an experiment that we did inspired by this, but with HRI. So here the scenario is, we tell them the robot, it has the task of cleaning up a bunch of toys in the lab, and this lab technician is just walking through the lab to get something and decides to stop and help for a bit. And so here on the left, it's a fairly coordinated joint action. The human is passing the objects to the robot, who's then putting them away. And on the right, it's less coordinated. They're just working in parallel, or it was supposed to be less coordinated. That was our hope. Just a teaser, I'll let you know, that didn't work. So if you look at that video, actually, it is coordinated, it's just coordinated in a different way. So he's not placing the toys in the robot's hand, but he's waiting for the robot to finish and then taking his turn. So it actually was coordinated, and I think that was a problem with our manipulation. So the test questions where we asked, how long do you think, or how long would you keep helping if you were in this lab technician's place? Okay. And also we asked them, so sometimes the robot has to stop to recalibrate its sensors. This requires the entire activity be stopped and can take place anywhere from a few seconds to 10 minutes. If you were in John's place and the robot had to pause to recalibrate, how long do you think you would wait for him before giving up and leaving? And it's a, I actually don't remember what the response options were. That doesn't look right. I'll have to check that. Anyway, and then we also asked how coordinated people thought the joint action was. So we predicted in the high coordination condition, they would say that they would persist longer, they'd be more patient, and we were hoping that they would also perceive that as being more coordinated. We didn't find that. So for the persistence and the patience questions, we found no difference between conditions. But we also found that people didn't perceive the one interaction to be more coordinated than the other. So that was disappointing. But what we did find was when we asked people, or we found a correlation. So the more coordinated they saw the interaction as being, irrespective of condition, the more they think they would persist and the more patient they would be. So that's what you see here. So there's a correlation between perceived coordination and perceived commitment operationalized as we did. So yeah, while that experiment didn't really work out, I think this, which was an exploratory analysis, it does suggest that it could be worth exploring this further. So yeah, just to come to the end, we have, I think, some preliminary evidence that a sense of commitment is possible in HRI, which may help to sustain motivation in the face of under and over performance. may also help in boosting humans' motivation to beneficial but boring or effortful tasks. And then, of course, this all highlights the need for reflection and discussion about the ethics of this. So yeah, do we want to design robots that can elicit a sense of human commitment on the part of human interactants? Obviously, that is something that we need to think about carefully before we race ahead doing it. So thanks, and thanks also to these wonderful people who've helped collaborate on these studies.
Thanks very much, John. Great talk and fascinating robots and research questions. Okay, we have time for some questions. The first one is, okay, so the first is sort of a quite general one about this idea that people might be motivated to meet others' expectations. Do you think this could apply also in one-shot interactions, not just long-term repeated interactions?
Yeah, it's a good question. We let's see. I mean, I guess I would say that to, at least to some extent, the idea is that we have evolutionarily we've developed a preference for meeting expectations, and in particular expectations about actions that others are depending on us to do, and that's a means of maintaining good relationships and a good reputation. And if there are going to be more interactions with the same person in the future, then that should be all the stronger, of course. But yeah, I wouldn't think that it's necessary for there to be future interactions. But that's something that we could test. Okay,
let me just add a quick follow-up question on that, because I suppose in a way, in the long-term picture, you are addressing also how expectations are built, right? So the more we work harder together, the more we form the expectation, that, right? Not just in one shot, I suppose the expectation comes from just social norm or something like that.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. This is okay. The question is specifically to the snake game. Was persistence longer in the no deception treatment? Sorry, was persistence longer in the no deception treatment than in the other treatments? And if this is correct, why do you think was that?
Yeah, good observation. Yeah, that's true. We didn't expect that, but yeah, quantitatively it's longer. So the first thing that we did was we ran an ANOVA to see if there was an effect of experiment on that, and it wasn't significant. So quantitatively it's longer, but the difference wasn't significant. So for that reason, I wouldn't read too much into it. So that's a between subjects factor, whereas in each experiment we were making within subject comparisons. So that could be the reason why. But I mean, I would speculate that there are multiple factors at work. So in this experiment, if I'm a participant, I'm bored, I can infer that the other person is probably also bored, and I don't want to keep going for too long because I think, well, I don't want to keep them here forever. But in addition to that, on some trials, I think, well, they did do that long captcha, so I don't want to stop too early. So that sense is maybe counteracting the sense that we need to finish this quickly because it's boring. So you have more of a conflict in the scenario where you think it's another person compared to where you don't think it's a person.
Thanks. Nice. I suppose, could it be also the other way around? Could it be, well, actually, I'm going to happily sit here and play longer, but since there's this other human, I think actually they are pretty bored. So, so I want to not be nice to them or something like that.
It is pretty boring. It would be hard to imagine that too many people would really want to stay longer than necessary.
Okay, fair enough. Okay, the robot learning the letters task.
Yeah.
So the question on that. So did the robot perform the letters tasks when it was taught it? And an add-on. I wonder what motivated people to teach the robot.
So the robot didn't actually perform the task. We faked that. So this is one of those Wizard of Oz scenarios where Well, actually, that was just pre-programmed. So the robot had a set of stock messages that it would produce after the human made the demonstration. So after the first time, it would always say something like, "Oh yes, thanks. Could you show me one more time?" Or "Oh yes, I think I could get it if I see it one more time." Things like this, and then the robot wouldn't actually guess the word. So people didn't actually know what was working or what wasn't working. So there was no feedback to them essentially. What motivated them? Yeah, I mean, the hope is that, well, first of all, I think in a scenario like that, they're probably first and foremost motivated by the desire to just do what the experimenter seems to want them to do. So there's a sense of commitment to the experimenter, I would think, first and foremost. And the fact that we do see some difference between conditions suggests that there might be an additional motivation. So if the robot has been, at least this is the way we'd like to interpret the results. If the robot seems to have been investing effort to make the task easier for the human, that the human wants to do that as well. That's the hypothesis anyway.
Thanks a lot. Maybe I'll add my own thought on this. So I've been also doing some work on human AI interactions, and humans playing games, economic games with artificial agents, and then they need to score points in those games. And sometimes people are pro-social, sometimes they are not. But often in conferences, I used to get asked, but why would a human on Earth do anything, in collaboration with a robot? The robot collects points. Who cares? Nobody cares. Why would you exert any effort? But I think your project works that people do just play the game. They do something with a robot, try to help it. So yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I admit initially when I thought of running some of these experiments with robots, the background idea was we could test to what extent people's sensitivity to factors like this might be automatic or very low level, so that it's not modulated by their background beliefs, because obviously people won't believe that they're really committed to a robot. But I think through the research that we've done, I've realized that was naive. So I think people just have very different attitudes. Some might think this is nonsense. There's no commitment to a robot, whereas some might, be quite happy to play the game like that. And most people probably fall somewhere along the spectrum. They might slide in and out of thinking that, I should interact with this agent as I would interact with a human. And sometimes maybe they don't think that way.
Yeah. Thanks very much, John. We ran out of time, and we have the next speaker already here. So yeah, thanks, John.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye-bye.